gain staging is like obviously if you just have all the tracks there and then you just think about your faders, you can adjust all those levels. But the gain staging it's not just one stage of level or volume that it's going through. You've got the input gain to recording, basically, which is how loud your track is. And then the gain of going from your track level to the first processor in your
chain of things.
In your chain.
Yes.
Yeah.
Chain.
And then from each plugin or each processor to each processor. And then finally going through your fader. And then from your fader, you're going out either submixes or going to the master mix. And so all those levels, all those stages are your gain staging. And I guess my biggest philosophy is understanding that, first of all, like knowing your signal flow is the most important thing. And then second is making sure that it's a nice cascading effect. So the example I always use is like water going through pipes. And so you want your pipes to just get bigger and bigger as it goes. If you have a really big pipe that goes down to a really small pipe, you're going to have all this water squirting through, which is essentially distortion. And so
that makes sense.
If you have the smaller pipe getting bigger and bigger. And so as your gain staging, just like if you turn up that first gain too loud, then you're going to have potentials for distortion everywhere. So I think that's my biggest takeaway is that.
I would add one thing to that. I think input gain should be considered your maximum and minimum dynamics. With your input gain staging, you have to realize that you're setting your full dynamic contrast for that source. And having a good input gain, like, again, it's that whole idea. You're talking about the pipes, right? If you don't have enough water coming, you can't make more water in the tubes. Technically there are ways in audio, but for the sake of the analogy, you really shouldn't. You should think from the beginning of building that dynamics and your maximum and minimum dynamics and understanding where those things are. If you have proper input gain staging, the rest of your signal chain will work better. And I think obviously in the mixing stages, especially, also we need to think about this from the perspective of live versus studio. Not because live is so different, but because you have different affordances, that's the word I'll use, that you have in live versus studio. But I think thinking about it as like that maximum minimum dynamic contrast, and input gain is that dynamic contrast. Anyways.
Yeah, I think that's something that's like really it's like really big, kind of like a clickbaity title that people will use when they talk about gain staging on YouTube and stuff is, you need to make sure you have like your tracks need to be coming in at like minus 18 dB RMS. Do you guys have any like opinions on that as far as gain staging goes, or like?
Well, this has been an issue for a lot of years. When we kind of moved from 16-bit to 24-bit, it was a really hot topic because especially when recording at 16-bit, it was a lot more important to record a hotter signal to avoid the noise floor and to like utilize more of the bits and such, as people will say in their discussions. I'll probably have comments about that, me saying that. But that was when we got to 24, everyone was still pushing like, you got to record really hot tracks and a really hot signal. You got to use all the bits. And what I've realized and what I've come to is it was always like the 2/3 kind of level, like 66% of your amplitude level, which really that's the minimum, and then up to like 80% somewhere in there, which is really -10 to -20. It's kind of in that 18 range. If you aim for that range, that gives you a nice healthy signal. You're not like super low, and like, because if you record too low of a signal, then you have to gain it up. And that's the same thing Joe was talking about. You have nowhere to go with it. Yeah,
it's basically like digital zoom on a camera, but
exactly.
Yeah, I would honestly equate it more to like ISO and like getting the right amount so that you have the proper balance, like light balance.
Yeah.
Now he's getting really complex. See,
depth and dynamics. Fine. Yeah, well, I work with video dudes. All right, guys, I don't want to hear this.
I work with video all day.
Everybody knows digital zoom on photos. It's just like getting pixelated, but it's the same concept.
Using analogies people understand is such a pedestrian way of explaining things.
You peasant.
Yeah, and this is why.
Okay. All right,
this is why we have a podcast
right
with.
Now. So this is great.
These three
get
people.
used to that.
But yeah, like it's true. If you record really low level, then there's actually quantization errors, which is really just like pixelation. It's the exact same thing. And that manifests itself as noise. And so, if you boost that up, you're gonna have noise. And then on the opposite end, if you record too hot, you're gonna have the potential to clip. And digital clipping is like super unforgiving.
And
so,
I hate digital clipping. That pisses me off.
But yeah, so that's why I just kind of aim for -10 and -20, and then that gives you the other problem that I've seen, and there's a certain DAW that kind of drives me crazy, that the loops that are built into it are all like really hot, like mastered level hot, and so as soon as you start putting it through any processing, it's like clipping, and so it's like, why can't you just do your loops at like -5 or -10, so I actually have some headroom to mix with? And that exactly equates to this discussion with gain staging. If you make it too hot, then as soon as you go to your first plugin, as soon as you add some EQ, because EQ's gain, you're boosting the signal, and if you're right up there towards the top of your signal, then you're gonna
so like I totally didn't know that when I first started mixing, and like I was just like, try to get as loud, like the whole bits thing, like try to get as loud as possible without clipping, right? And so when you're taking tracks, when you're recording and when you're getting stems and stuff like that, and you're trying to get them as hot as possible, like you said, you lose this headroom that you absolutely need, because like once you start running it through your effects chains and all the other stuff like compression, equalization, and just your like even like series of compression, because like because we all do serialized compression at this point in modern mixing, but
yeah,
I'm now so much more comfortable with having lower level stems now than I used to be. It was just foundational, whatever. Gain staging, it matters. Don't suck at it.